So, with so much to get through, please welcome to the screen our Research Director, Stephen Yap, to take us through the latest thoughts. Stephen, are you there?
Hi, Lee. Good morning.
Perfect.
Good morning.
Over to you.
Good morning, everybody. And when it comes to people and when it comes to how our workplace is changing, there can be no doubt the very biggest story has been, is currently, and will continue to be the enforced shift from working in the office to working remotely. And it's been the biggest story throughout lockdown for not just people in contact centers and people in offices, but it's probably the biggest story of all. It's become a huge story that has dominated the headlines for the past few months and will continue to dominate headlines. As restrictions start to slowly ease, will people start coming back to the offices? It's a huge debate. It's become a massive cultural story that's transcended the business page to become the front page. And of course, there's many different viewpoints on this, and there's many different perspectives on whether indeed the shift to remote working will become a permanent phenomenon. So in light of this big debate, and in light of the fact that we've had to move many of our staff to remote working over the past few months, and indeed today and for the near future, many of our staff will continue to remote work. What have been the implications on our operations and the implications on our colleagues? Well, if I think back to just 4 months ago at the CCMA National Conference just last November, we did a poll during the national conference and we asked the attendees, of which I'm sure there are many also attending today, what will be your top people priority in 2021? And here are the results. As you can see here, the biggest priority for when it comes to people is upskilling advisors. And in joint second place, the second biggest priorities was ensuring advisors had the equipment and resources they were needed to work remotely, and also mental health and well-being. And then the third biggest priority was flexible working. So I thought this morning we could revisit these themes. We could revisit the top three, in fact, the top four themes, and really see where are we at now? What is the state of play as we come to the end of Q1 2021 in terms of these top priorities that you told us would be your themes for this year? So let's start with advisors. And it's very clear that the advisor's role is changing. And this was something that was already happening before the pandemic. It was already happening before lockdown. But as with so many things, lockdown and the pandemic has accelerated this shift. The advisor's role is changing. And of course, many of us accelerated our adoption of omnichannel. Many of us were able to roll out new digital channels to help manage demand. We saw huge spikes in customer demand at the onset of the pandemic. Many of us are still experiencing escalated demand today and are predicting that demand to continue to be high into the future. And to help manage that demand, we created new self-service channels, which means that the advisor role is now dealing with those more complex types of queries that only human beings can effectively deal with. So that means that more than ever, advisors need to work on their soft skills. We need advisors to be able to deal with those complex queries, not just the simple transaction queries. We need advisors to be able to solve problems. And what we also have seen over the past few months is that as the contact center has become the primary front line of the organization, the primary interface between our customers and our organizations and our brands, as other touch points for customers have become less available, as stores have been closed, for example, customers primarily interface with us through the contact center. And that means the contact center is playing a bigger role than ever before when it comes to marketing, when it comes to customer experience. Contact centers in all sectors are not just dealing with post-purchase queries and traditional customer service types of queries. Increasingly, contact centers are dealing with pre-purchase queries. They're dealing with sales inquiries. They're helping with a much wider array of customer journeys than ever before. And that means the advisor's job content is broadening and becomes more complex and more sophisticated. So therefore, you have the need to upskill. And what does upskilling mean? Well, it means training, of course, but it also means defining what the role is. And more contact centers are starting to put structure, and they're starting to put rigor, and they're starting to put definitions around the advisor's roles at each level. So if you think about the typical hierarchy within a contact center and the different levels that exist, more and more we are defining those roles concretely, we are attaching skills to them, and we are creating career paths so that people know what they need to do and how their skills need to develop in order to progress to the next level. And that then allows you to create training, allows you to performance manage, it allows you to set objectives, and it creates more defined career opportunities for advisors so that they can see actually that they have pathways available to them within the contact center. And over time, I anticipate that this will lead to pay within the contact center increasing. It will lead to the contact center being a more aspirational, more desirable place to work. And we'll start to see qualifications, more formal qualifications, more skills-based qualifications start to become a reality within the contact center. Another aspect of upskilling, which is incredibly encouraging, is that more and more there is mobility to and from the contact center and other parts of the organization. The fact is, if you've cut your teeth in the contact center, you're probably very well suited for a number of other roles within the organization. You know an awful lot about the customer. You know an awful lot about how the organization works and what the operations landscape looks like. You have a very good network, most likely, if you've worked in a contact center, because you have to be connected to other parts of the organization in order to do the contact center job. And with all of that experience, that sets you as a contact center colleague in a good place to be able to do other jobs. And that's indeed what we're seeing. It also works the other way, of course. Retail is a great example of this. We know of a number of retailers who, because of the downsizing of physical store estates, have managed to successfully transfer store staff into the contact center. So that sort of mobility is also another aspect of upskilling. It's another aspect of creating more defined and aspirational career opportunities for contact center teams. So there's a lot of good progress when it comes to our top priority this year, and I only expect this progress to continue. However, there are some barriers. There are some big barriers, and some of these barriers have really come to the fore during lockdown. And I would define these barriers in terms of legacy. There's two kinds of legacy as I see it. The first is technology legacy. As we've worked really hard to accelerate our ability to work remotely, and in many cases also we've accelerated our omni-channel capability. Now the focus is on the back-end systems, the systems that connect our advisors to our CRM databases, to other parts of the organization. And the reality is, in many of our organizations, our frontline teams still don't have adequate access to understand customer history, to understand transaction history, and that holds them back from doing their jobs. The connectivity between the contact center and the other parts of the organization is really still where we have a gap in many parts of our industry. And alongside that, also what we're seeing is that there are still gaps in many organizations, which I would describe as process legacy. Frankly, as a contact center dealing with customers, as the front line of the organization, you are the coalface. We are the coalface. We are seeing things as they happen in the marketplace, and the pace at which we operate is not necessarily matched by the pace of other parts of the organization. And that has, in some cases, been exacerbated in lockdown, during furlough, when many other parts of the organization have been downsized due to furlough. And therefore, our ability to service customers and resolve queries has been hampered in some cases because other colleagues and other parts of the organization have less availability. And so I am hearing that there are gaps when the contact center is doing everything they can to solve customer problems. But of course, in many cases, we rely on our colleagues in other departments to actually resolve the queries. And that is what I call process legacy. So I think these are going to be themes that we will continue to talk about and explore more deeply in the months to come. How do we overcome these technology barriers? How do we overcome process legacy? And what it all means for me is we need to be more joined up, even more joined up with other parts of the organization. We've done incredible work in the contact center to allow our customers to reach us, to roll out new self-service channels. How can we now make sure that we are more joined up with other parts of the organization so that our teams can do their jobs? The second priority that we highlighted was ensuring advisors have the equipment and resources they need to work remotely. And I came across a study just a few days ago from Curry's PC World and Canon, which I thought is interesting. I'm shamelessly lifting an infographic from that particular study. And that study, which interviewed about 2,000 people in the UK who were working remotely, one of the things they looked at is where people work. Where do people work within their homes? And as you can see here, people work all over the place. People just don't only work in a dedicated situation. Not everybody has a dedicated room or even a dedicated desk. I found it incredibly enlightening, really quite interesting, and maybe a little worrying to find that 17% of people work in a bedroom. Now, of course, you may have a dedicated desk in your bedroom, but I'm sure not all of those 17% have dedicated space within their bedrooms. These may be people who are sharing accommodation, and all they have in terms of private space is a bedroom. And no doubt some of our own teams will be also in certain circumstances. And this is what it means by ensuring advisors have equipment and resources. It's not just making sure they've got the right headsets and they've got the right audio and computer equipment. Do they have the space to be able to work remotely? This is a question that we are going to be exploring within the CCMA. So we're just putting the finishing touches on a piece of research that is about to go live. We're about to collect data in the coming weeks, and then we're going to be launching this in the middle of April to really explore this theme around equipment, resources, and very importantly, working spaces. Do people have adequate resources and working spaces to be able to do their jobs? This is an open question, and I'm going to be very interested to see what the results of this research brings next month. Of course, mental health and well-being is top of all of our agendas. This is a data point from YouGov that showed that people aged 25 to 39, who of course are the dominant age cohort within the contact center, this is the age cohort that's most likely to report negative impact on mental health as a result of the pandemic. You can also see other headlines below from YouGov, the rise of anxiety. We are all familiar with, and we all understand the challenges that COVID and pandemic and extended lockdown have brought to us. Many of us have experienced the challenges ourselves or know people who have been challenged. The good news is, if there can be good news on such a topic, is that we've seen consistently through lockdown from contact center leaders a renewed focus on tackling mental health. It is top of the agenda for leaders up and down the country. Some of the things that leaders are working on, making sure that their colleagues, our colleagues, have opportunities to connect, and not just those scheduled, planned opportunities that are in the diary, but making sure there are spontaneous opportunities. That's one of the things we've lost during lockdown. That's one of the things we've lost when we're working with each other through screens, is that spontaneity. So things like open chat rooms in Microsoft Teams, open Facebook groups where colleagues can just drop in and share, the equivalent of the water cooler conversation. Those are really important, and we know that many leaders are working really hard to make that happen. There's been a big focus on helping our managers, so particularly our frontline managers, our team leaders, whose jobs have changed almost out of all recognition, people who are having to support their advisors who are challenged with the restrictions of lockdown, who themselves, like all of us, are being challenged with everything that lockdown has brought on. How do we support those who support others? And that has been a big topic on the people agenda. As I mentioned earlier, we've really looked at how we strengthen our relationships with other departments. There is work to do still on that point, but we are seeing a focus on strengthening those relationships. Sometimes when the processes aren't there, the only thing that gets the job done is the relationship and your network and the people that you know. Another theme that we're seeing emerging is this concept of emotional intelligence, or EQ. It's a big story in leadership, not just within the contact center. And it's a fact, when you're managing people through a screen, it's much harder to be able to pick up on those unspoken, non-verbal signals. Perhaps one of your colleagues is having a bad day or not in a good place. When you're in the office, you can look people in the eyes and you can pick up on those signals. It's so much harder to do over a screen. And as a result, there's been a growing emphasis on this emotional intelligence, this ability to pick up those nonverbal cues among colleagues. And this has been also one of those themes that has emerging, and I believe will continue to be a theme beyond lockdown. How do we flex our emotional intelligence? How do we pick up on those signals that people don't necessarily tell us? How do we be proactive and help support our colleagues, even when they don't ask for support? When it comes to flexible working, when it comes to hybrid working, one thing is really clear, and the debate has also made it really clear, the big debate about home versus office working. There is no right answer. There's no right answer. The answer depends on so many different things. The answer depends on your organization and your colleagues. You've got to consider the needs of your colleagues alongside the need of the organization. Most contact centers are going to be allowing some flexibility moving forward after lockdown. Most contact centers are going to be allowing individuals a certain amount of choice as to whether they work at home or come back to the office. Now, should you allow the complete freedom to choice? Well, it depends, because there are certain jobs whose content may require people to be in the office. If someone's job requires constant access to company resources and connectivity to company networks, access to sensitive information, maybe that's a job that needs to be in the office. So there's a lot of factors that you've got to think about. And that's why there's no right answer, because the answer is it depends. Something else that's come through on a different note when we're all working behind our screens at home is the increased threat of job commoditization. As a contact center worker working behind a screen, there is the possibility that one contact center job starts to feel like any other contact center job when I don't have my team around me. The reality is the building, the colleagues, the buzz, the camaraderie is a huge part of why our colleagues choose to work for us. And without that, one job starts to feel like another job. And that means more than ever that we need to think about culture. We need to think about ways that we can extend our culture and make people feel a sense of belonging even while they're working remotely. The next level of flexible working, if you follow my thread, if you follow the idea that job content is becoming more sophisticated, pay grades will go up, advisors will become more recognized, advisor jobs will become more aspirational. The next level could be giving them more autonomy in terms of deciding how they work. Historically, of course, and even today, contact centers have been a tightly regimented, rota-based, shift-based system. This is an idea that was put forward in a podcast. This is a podcast from Balto, who are a very interesting company. If you haven't come across them, I would recommend you look into them. They're a speech analytics company that actually analyzes speech in real time in the contact center and prompts agents with recommendations on things that agents can say. Balto. So the Balto podcast suggested maybe the next level is giving agents and advisors more autonomy, to allow some flexibility and allowing advisors to choose rosters themselves. We're already hearing within lockdown that actually in some ways it has promoted flexibility. It's easier to fill those late night 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. shifts. It's easier to split shifts and have 3 to 4 hour shifts when there isn't a commute to factor in. Could this be the next level, allowing advisors more autonomy to actually select their own shifts? So I'm going to end with 5 priorities that I think are top of the people agenda today and will continue for the rest of this year and beyond. As I've mentioned, you've got to balance the needs of the individual and the organization when it comes to hybrid working. There's no right way to do it. You've got to think about what's right, not just for the colleague, but for the business. And you've got to do that on a colleague by colleague level. Emotional intelligence for leaders is never more important than it is today, when we're all physically disconnected and where the welfare of our colleagues is so important. Flexing that emotional intelligence to help look after our colleagues and allow others to look after ourselves as well. As a result of the fact that all of a sudden we're all working at home, and some of the things that are important to us, like the physical environment, like the camaraderie from being in an office, has gone away. More than ever, the values and the purpose of the organization are critical to help people feel a sense of belonging, to help people keep people in the jobs as a driver of retention. And the good news is, of course, that we are alongside this creating more skills-based roles, better defined job prospects and more career opportunities within the contact center and to and from other departments. But to really accelerate this, we've got to overcome the many legacy issues that still continue to exist within our organization, technology legacies, connecting our colleagues to other parts of the organization, understanding the customer history, and ensuring that other departments have empathy for us and are working at the same pace as we are to help solve customer issues. Thank you for listening, and back to you, Lee.